Welcome to Native Plants of the Pacific Northwest and Their Benefits. Today's talk, we're going to have a tag team. We've got Dr. David James, Associate Professor, Department of Entomology, and Dr. Linda Hardison of the Oregon Flora Project, and a Research Assistant Professor in the Department of Botany and Plant Pathology at Oregon State University. Please welcome Linda Hardison.
Thank you very much for having me. Garrett first spoke with us about terroir and how half of that can sort of be driven by what's underneath the soil. And also, that relationship then depends upon what's on top of the soil, the plants, right? And this time of year is so beautiful, and as people deeply engaged in and relating to plants, I never cease to marvel at what happens with plants. Plants drive everything, right? I mean, they give us the oxygen that we breathe. They appear, they have these little seeds that are little time capsules for their progeny that they cast out, and years later, decades later, sometimes those can recreate an organism. And they give us everything from all of these different forms, from wood, that's on plants that are hundreds of feet tall, to delicate leaves, to roots that can extend for meters underground, that are communicating chemically with other organisms, other forms of life. And it's these plants that let us know where we are on the earth. You can figure out where you are by looking at the plant communities and relating to the different plants that are unique to this place. And that's what makes it, roots us in this place that we're at, and makes us have our story and our relationship to where we are. So a question is, where do you find out about plants? If you want to know about the plants that grow in an area, what's your source of information? The internet, right? Well, yes, there are definitely sources on the internet, and more we're able to find collections of information, hopefully curated information that tells us about a place and what is appropriate and native or indigenous to a particular area. There are also lots of books that do this. And a classical form of communicating what plants are associated with a region is called a flora, or a plant identification manual. Floras are comprehensive in the sense that they provide all of the information known about plants of a particular type that occur in a given region. So our name sort of tells it all, Oregon Flora. We're looking at the geopolitical region of the state of Oregon, and we're studying the vascular plants of this state. And so vascular, to remind you, are those ones that include ferns, conifers, grasses, orchids, other monocots, and dicots. We look at the plants that grow outside of cultivation. So all the things that will grow in the wild. So why do you need something like this in this format? Because you need a sort of a comprehensive source for this body of information, because it's then used in so many different ways. And so a flora helps you to understand a region and know what diversity exists there, and then also to identify what you might find there. And it gives detailed information, really detailed information about every plant that has been documented to occur in an area. So this information is important because it lets you as a land manager understand what you have on your holdings and how it relates to the other plants there. So land managers can be of any scale. You can be a home gardener and you're managing a piece of land and the plants that grow there, just like a federal agency that manages millions of acres of our state. And another thing that a Flora does, and what Oregon Flora works really hard to accomplish, is to bring this information and make it relevant to really broad users. And I mean broad in the sense of people of different stakeholders, different interests, as well as the depth of that information, whether you are interested in looking at pretty color pictures of flowers on a rainy winter night, or you are doing genetic research or some other type of study that requires details about any plant. And so those are the sorts of things that are accomplished with the Flora and what Oregon Flora strives to provide for the public. So as I mentioned, Floras are sort of a traditional format, and so we are publishing a 3-volume series of books, and we're working on finishing up the 3rd volume this year or early next year. So what I'd like to do today is tell you about some of these tools that Oregon Flora, that this floristic project offers to you, and how that might relate to what you do as wine producers and grape growers that are really deeply tied to your local environment and your community, both of organisms and people. So just some numbers. Again, we're talking about the vascular plants of the state that grow outside of cultivation, and plants are classified in a sort of hierarchical manner with families, and then underneath that is a genus, and underneath each genus can be species, or even smaller than that, subspecies or varieties. And there are over almost 5,000 unique species, subspecies, or varieties. I also refer to that as a taxon, or a taxonomic concept, that grow in the state. And we keep track of all of this information, and we establish this by starting out with a checklist, because you have to know what's around before you can organize it. And where the Oregon Flora program got started in 1994, so we've been at this for a little over 30 years to develop this data set. And it started by the founder going to the place where there's the best documentation of the plants that are found in the state, and that's a herbarium. A herbarium is sort of a cross between a library and a museum, because it's pressed, dried plant specimens of an area. Oregon State University's herbarium is de facto the world's largest collection of Oregon plants. It's documentation that you can touch and say, this plant grew in this state at whatever time was written on the label. So it's the one room that you can go to and touch every plant that's grown in the state or is growing in the state. So that's kind of cool. And so that kind of resource is what was needed to start writing a flora. And so as the process of developing the flora became underway, that the herbarium specimens were evaluated. New scientific names were checked against the scientific literature, because there are always changes, and that's something that's very dynamic that we work a lot on to try and track. And then organizing that information in relational database to make it the most usable, and to parse information out so that it can be sliced and diced in ways that lots of different people can use it. And so there are a lot of scientific names indicated that we keep track of. Why so many names if there's only about 5,000 plants? Because names change. And the purpose of nomenclature in botany and in science is to explain how things are evolutionarily related. And so you put a plant or an organism in a group because you're saying, well, from my knowledge, it's most closely related to other species in this genus. Well, as we get new information, much of it these days genetic, which we can't see with our eyes, that can throw a wrench in things because this information says, oh no, this plant is actually more closely related to something else. And so as taxonomists, people who deal with the classification and relationships of plants, we then have to change the scientific name. And that sometimes upsets people a lot because you get to know somebody by the name like Mahonia or Mimulus, and then somebody comes and says, no, 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 it's Berberis and it's Erythranthe. And, but we want to give the best science possible, and so we do these things, and we hear about it. And, but we also give you the way to understand and stick with your familiar, friendly name that you do know. And so those are synonyms, you know, taxonomic synonyms, and those are always, on our website, you can always find a plant by whether you search on its synonym, or whether you search on a common name, or whether you search on the accepted scientific name of the time. So of the plants in Oregon, a little over 70% of them are native, what we refer to as native, and that would be plants that have been established without human intervention into the landscape. They reproduce through times, and one of the sort of frameworks that we put on it, a common one, is that to our best knowledge, that plant has been in the landscape prior to Western settlement of an area. So 70-something% are what we call native. Other plant categories would include naturalized, things that, though weren't established on the landscape from those criteria I just described, have settled themselves in and have adapted. They can reproduce. There are multiple populations of them. And those we consider also and treat in the book version of the flora. There are also exotic, non-naturalized plants. Many plants also have the additional category of being a weed or an invasive. Weed is a subjective term. It's really a plant that's growing where you don't want it to grow. Invasive has some legal implications behind it, and all of these things are reflected in the flora and shared through these resources. So what I'm going to do is describe some of these tools that we have to better understand our plant life as ways that you can then learn about the plants that are on your property or that you have interest in for some reason. These are pages that are taken from the Flora of Oregon, the book version of the flora. And again, as a comprehensive resource, the kind of information we have are detailed descriptions about each of those taxa, those unique plants that occur in the state that are native or naturalized. There's also information about habitat. Where can you find these things? What will you find them associated with? And then we feature for each one a little thumbnail map. And if you look closely, or go look at the books on the table, you'll see that there are some shaded regions, and those regions reflect the 11 ecoregions that are found in Oregon. This is anything from the blue mountain Wallowas to the lava plains to the Willamette Valley. There are about, I think, 1,800 unique plants at the species level in the Willamette Valley, and about 1,000 of those are native species. There are also dots on the map, and that refers to the specimens at the OSU herbarium that we have documented and confirmed the identification of. So in the process of writing these books, we have our workers and our contributors have annotated over 150,000 plant specimens just at Oregon State University. And we also can refer to other herbaria that have plants from Oregon. So these are like our golden records that you can walk into that room, touch it, look at it and say, yep, that's it, or nope, that's not it, I'm changing my mind. There are also illustrations. We have a primary artist, John Myers, who has done hundreds of illustrations, original pen and ink drawings for the book. And an illustration differs from a photograph. And one of the reasons we have these and not photographs in the book is because it's like the concept of a plant. And so the artist is giving you in their drawing, all the features that are part of that description. You might see one example in a photograph. It's one example that has some difference or variation, and you don't want your idea of that plant to be based solely on one instance. And so an illustration is really like deeply packed knowledge about a particular plant. So this is the book format, and then one thing that is very traditional is having ways to identify them that are dichotomous keys. So you have two choices, and you follow the suite down to identify your unknown collection. So another thing that's unique about what Oregon Flora does is we put this into context. And our volumes have front chapters that really tie all this information and explain why is this information, all of these details, relevant to me as an entomologist, or me as a gardener, or my colleague who is a historian. And so these provide a different lens through which to view all of this plant diversity information, and it's also supported by some of the wonky details in appendices that support each of the topics. So we've covered topics like the ecology of Oregon, historical botanists from the state, from early Western settlement to contemporaries that are working alongside us right now, landscaping with native plants, plant-insect interactions. In Volume 3, we're going to have chapters on climate change and how that affects the plants of the state, and what we might expect in terms of plant distributions and plant communities as our climate changes, and also ethnobotany and how indigenous people have impacted what we call as native plants to an area and their interactions with some of those plants. So the website, OregonFlora.org, is a digital version of all of this information and more. Because it's digital, we're able to have a lot of interactive features like photos, maps that you can explore, drill down, and get the details about each occurrence. And so what I'm going to do is just walk you through some screenshots of some of the main features that hopefully will excite you about the possibilities that you can use to apply to your particular needs. So one of the easiest things is starting out with, we have a fact sheet for every plant that has been documented in the state. And so that's more than just those almost 5,000. It includes the exotics. It includes things that somebody saw on the side of a railroad and was clearly a waif, but we have a page that lets you know where it's been found, what it is, what its scientific name is, a picture. Hopefully we have a picture of at least a herbarium specimen. And then we've included details about or text of any descriptions that have been published by the Flora of Oregon already in volumes 1 and 2, or from the Flora of North America, another sort of comprehensive resource. The maps are interactive, and so if you were to click on this dot map, which shows where we have found where there are photographs or observations without a voucher specimen or herbarium specimens, you can find behind each one of those dots a page that gives you all the details. So we have, because our software platform is Symbiota, and that's part of a national, actually a global network, we're able to readily exchange information about herbarium specimens. And so we have well over 1 million records that can be put as a dot on a map, and behind each one of those records we have details as shown in the right-hand side of the screen. So that's a lot of information, and you can also slice and dice that depending upon what kind of collection you want to explore. Some of the other tools that are on the Oregon Flora website include a mapping module. And again, with these million-plus records, you can either explore the diversity of an area, such as your vineyard. You can draw a polygon around it and see what plants have been documented there or in the nearby area. And so that can give you insights into the diversity of a place. You can also look at the distribution of any particular plant. So maybe you are thinking about how you want to design a natural area on your holdings and say, well, where can I find both deer fern and vine maple and bleeding hearts? So you can just type all that in and you'll get a picture of where those three co-occur across the state. And that can give you insights into what kind of habitats or what kind of landscapes can I explore and see, oh, well, does this match where I'm wanting those things to be? Or I see, oh, that plant, I really love that plant, but it really only occurs naturally in Eastern Oregon. How challenging might it be for me to make it grow in my soggy soil? So this way of visualizing where plants occur can be really helpful as you think and plan about some of the ways you want to interface with native species. Another tool that we have is an identification one. The book format has dichotomous keys, which require a certain amount of willingness to dig into botanical terminology. I like to think of vocabulary as the paintbrush of botany, because you can have, words have been created and applied to define the most subtle differences in texture or shape or form, and that can be really overwhelming for a lot of people. A good glossary helps, and we have that, but there's an easier way, or there's a more interactive way, and we do have interactive keys on our website. And so our Identify Plants tool lets you go to a map, say, where am I? You basically know where you are on the planet when you're out, and you drop a pin on that map, and then the software will pull from our database all of the plant occurrences within a given radius, or the algorithm defines what's the best radius we can get to give you a selection of plants that have been documented around where you're standing, so you know what your likely culprits are for what your unknown plant is. Then you simply go through filtering tools and try and find those that match what you have. So you don't need to know about whether it's hirsutellus or hirsute surfaces, or if the leaves are acuminate or slightly obtuse. You can say, oh, well, my leaves are opposite. They're coming off the stem like this, not like that. And so you can put that. Or the flowers are pink. Or, oh, the ovules are attached. And we have those sorts of filtering options that then limit or narrow down your choices that have been documented in that area. We also have customized or specialized characters for some really complicated groups that don't fit everything else. And that one case would be like in the ferns, because not all of the vascular plants have spores like ferns. That's kind of the neat thing about them. And so we have features about that. Or in the sunflower family, which are really complicated, and you say it's yellow and it's got lots of petals. Well, that gives you a list of 175 plants in a 10-kilometer radius area. And so that's not terribly helpful. So we've created a bunch of characters that are unique to that plant family. So we've got that as a deeper dive in that will help you identify things. It makes plant identification a lot less intimidating and really opens it up to a lot of different audiences. We also have inventories, and this is one way that Oregon Flora has interacted and engaged the public with this whole effort of sharing knowledge about plants. So these are inventories, they're checklists or species lists, and they're canned in the sense that it's got a name associated with it based on its lat-long values, and it's some of them have been collected to encompass all the information that we have from there, and others are lists that people have gone out and walked along and written down what they see, and they submit those lists to us, and we sort of do a ground truthing of it, well, no, that plant does not occur here, and then we'll ask them about it. But it's a piece of information that many of these have come from the Native Plant Society of Oregon, from individuals doing research projects, or some people who just love plants and will go out and visit areas and submit these. And you can sort of scroll through and find some common names that you keep seeing of these people. Oh man, this person has been clearly working in the Western Cascades for 30 years, and so we've got that kind of documentation, and it really, I think, engages the public in creating a scholarly resource and reference that's available for all. Lastly, because we are affiliated with the OSU Herbarium, we serve as the world's face to OSU Herbarium data. And we also, because we are part of that portal I was telling you about, share records from over 100 different herbaria that have Oregon specimens or specimens of taxa that grow in Oregon. So you can see something, if a plant is growing in Oregon without cultivation, we'll take different herbarias, records of those, even if that particular plant specimen that we're showing an image of is growing in Iowa or in Washington State or in California. So that's getting back to the diversity or the distribution of plants that are found in Oregon. So those are some of the tools that we have through our website. And one that I think will really resonate here is the Grow Natives tool. And so this was initially developed thinking about gardeners and landscapers, and then through, and that was with the help of Portland's Metro that we developed this. And what it is it provides a group of taxa. We're now up to 300 taxa that are native plants that are commercially available. And these are things that people are interested in or want to grow either for gardening or landscaping. And then we've also, in a second phase, when we added more species to get up to that 300 instances, included taxa that are involved in restoration. So this is a tool for the landscaper as well as the restorationist. And it has these plants where you can filter, again, on what you're looking for. So this is a good target thing. You look at your land, or you look at your garden plot, or you look at your restoration site and say, okay, I need something that, I'm seeking something that has these features, that can tolerate seasonal flooding, that has full sun, that has a good rhizome structure, so it might be something that will hold soil and avoid erosion. And then it gives you a list of taxa that meet those criteria. The commercial availability is something that we're constantly working on to increase the participation in those, but it's something that we heard so much about. When we go and talk about native plants, people say, oh gosh, they get so excited and they want to do these things, but then where do they go? Where do they get the materials? And so this is something that we're working to continuously build out. We have options, and that's a filtering option. So if you're down in the Siskiyous, you can select the ones in Southern Oregon, in the Siskiyou area. It'll indicate whether it's a wholesaler, a retailer, or both, and then give you a list of the plants, the native species that we've confirmed are native. We've clarified the name, the nomenclature on it, and share those and encourage you to look at those businesses as places where you can source some of these plants that are going to meet your particular planting needs. And we also have fact sheets about them, and some suggestions of, well, this would fit well in a pollinator garden, or this species will also work in, in a woodland garden. And in those little garden palettes, we have a list of species that might work in that situation. And then the fact sheet has a nice folksy little paragraph to summarize it, as well as all of the details that we have. We're also developing a comparable in this format rare plant guide. And this is really geared more towards professionals. And in that we'll have a filtering tool and fact sheets about plants of conservation concern within the state. And that's something that can help agency botanists and restorationists and conservationists identify, manage, and be aware of threats, and also learn with protected access to the details about that, where these plants occur. So it's a really valuable tool to help stimulate conservation as well as research. So one other thing that Oregon Flora has been involved in recently is we partnered with the Oregon Bee Project and the Extension Pollinator office department it's not a department, it's a person at Oregon State University to develop something that they called the Bee Friendly Wine Grapes program or certification. And I'm sure some of you in this room are part of this endeavor. And back in 2022, when we started this, that was realizing that this marriage of plant diversity data was necessary to talk about pollinator and bee diversity, because the plants are the basis of it all, And so in developing this program, we went to selected wineries and then asked them through their staff, through workers on this program, to get an inventory of the plants that they are aware of on their property. And they capture this information on iNaturalist. And then the bee program, the bee project folks, then paired that information of plant occurrences with their database of plant-insect interactions and said, well, we have documented somewhere an association of this bee species with this plant species. And so that then gives you an idea of what kinds of bees you might find on your property. And with that, we then looked at what the larger picture of plant diversity was for a region through the Oregon Flora databases, and came up with lists that we could then share with the winery about taxa that you could look for or strive to add to your natural areas. A lot of the plants that were showing up were non-natives, and the big hitters, like you might expect, would be blackberries, and these are things where bees were found associated with them. Blackberries, dandelions, hawkweeds, phacelias, and yeah, I mean, that's undeniable that those are resources for organisms, and it also gives us the opportunity to say, well, wouldn't it be nice to have some native species that you could integrate to sort of to shift things to a more native resource for pollinators? And so using the knowledge from the flora and all of those details about when does something bloom, what shape is its flower, what size is it, we came up with suggestions that would complement these and provide information about what habitats you can find these plants in, when they bloom, so you can provide a continuous nectar and pollen source for insects, different morphologies of flowers that might accommodate different physiologies of insects, and then just the beauty of them. So this project is continuing, or Andoni Melithopoulos, who runs the Oregon Bee Project, is continuing with a different project to expand and explore how can wineries best prepare their adjacent headlands or their alleys to prepare and promote the success of native species. And I think as you look at the story, you know, like Daphne was saying, what's your story? When you have visitors come to a winery, they can appreciate, like the creator of this winery and of this place is that they are making a place rooted in this site that reflects the unique features of where we are on the land. It's based on the soil, literally based on the soil, and it's manifested in the plant life. And when, with a resource like Oregon Flora, you can learn about what native species really are going to reflect this terroir, this diversity that we can show people and have people visit our wineries and see, you know, little popcorn flowers or camas or different kinds of plant species that are native that have belonged in this landscape. That, I think, ties people more to the story of being rooted in this place and bringing the natural diversity and beauty of this place to your vineyard. So thank you, and I'm going to pass it on to David now, and if there are any questions, we'll answer both at the end. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So continuing with the theme of native plants and beneficial insects, I'll be talking about the projects that I've conducted in eastern Washington, which is obviously a different climate from here, so the native plants are different. So beneficial insects. So when I'm talking about beneficial insects, I mean, I'm an entomologist, so to me, 99% of insects are beneficial. But the beneficial insects that we did this research for were mostly predators and parasitoids of vineyard pests. So, you know, it was conducted with grape industry money. So there's four groups of beneficial insects. There's the predators, which are, you know, it's a huge diversity of predators, all the things you know, spiders, predatory bugs, hunting wasps like that. And then there's parasitoids, which are parasitic wasps, tiny things usually in that circle that are pretty much unseen, but they play a valuable role. There's a most important one called Anagrus that controls leaf hoppers in grapevines. That's an important one, but there's hundreds of them. And there's pathogens, which would be more important here in your much more moist environment. Pathogens do much better with more humidity. And then there's pollinators, as Linda was talking about. So they're the four main groups. But for vineyards, the beneficial insects we were particularly concerned about at the time were the ones that are listed there: lacewings, lady beetles, predatory bugs, beneficial flies. Yes, there are beneficial flies. Predatory thrips, parasitic wasps, and spiders. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is the diversity of insects, the web of insect life. On the screen here are the insects and mites that feed on spider mites, which, you know, are a significant pest of grapevines in Washington, at least, and they probably are here too. And so it's a complex of predatory insects that attack a pest. And that's how you get the best biological control. It's never by one predator, it's the whole community. So that's an important thing to remember there. Biodiversity is the key. This is a slide that I put together from images by a guy on the internet called Sloan Tomlinson, who loves wasps. And there's a huge diversity of wasps. It's just incredible. And we don't know all the species that are involved, that haven't been identified. So the biggest threat to beneficial insects in the past, and still is, of course, is habitat loss, removing their habitat. And vineyards have been part of that, taking out natural habitat. And so it's agriculture and urban development that are the most frequent causes of beneficial insect loss, not just pollinators, but beneficial insects generally. But we're reversing that trend now. You're part of the movement of integrating nature with agriculture, with vineyards, and increasingly becoming partners. And it's a slow process, but it will happen. I'd love to be able to come back in 50 years' time and just see the progress we've made, because the progress is very small. I've been working as an entomologist for 50 years now, and every time I do a project or new development, the uptake is very slow. It takes a long time, and so we have to be patient. But agriculture and nature are becoming partners. And the role played by wild areas of reservoirs of beneficial insects can't be understated. So in this slide here, you can see the agriculture in the background, and then in the foreground is the native habitat. This is, the Eastern Washington native habitat, which is, it's the reservoir. It's the place where all our beneficial insects live, because it's the ancestral home, the shrub steppe for beneficial insects in Eastern Washington. And here, of course, it'll be a different ancestral home. So native plants are the home for beneficial insects. That they are the things that they've evolved with. And they provide the food and the refuge for natural enemies of pests and pollinators. So there are ways we can help these beneficial insects, and providing nectar resources is the obvious one, which many people do. And nectar and pollen are very important for things like predators and parasitoids, which people didn't used to think they were that. Predators and parasitoids had a job to do, and they weren't visiting flowers. But that's patently not true. All predators and parasitoids need a little bit of nectar, a little bit of sugar to go with the protein they get from feeding on other insects. So they will visit flowers, and they need flowers. On the slide is a hoverfly. So this is an example of a beneficial fly, also known as a syrphid fly, and they always look like wasps, so they're mimicking wasps. And in my career, I've had instances of farmers wanting to kill these things because they think there's a whole bunch of wasps in my crop, but they're actually hoverflies that, as larvae, they feed on aphids, and as adults, they're pollinators, second only to bees, most likely. Native plants also provide refuge and shelter. And that's, that can't be understated. You have a lot more refuge here than we do in the shrub steppe. So, the sagebrush, the sagebrush plant is a major refuge in Eastern Washington. And it provides overwintering habitat here. It's sagebrush in the slide here next to an orchard. And beneficial insects are overwintering in that. They do overwinter. We've done research on that, and it's a big home for beneficial insects, many different types, and huge numbers of individuals. Improving microclimate is something else in our environment, maybe not so much here, that helps beneficial insects when it's hot and dry. Providing a little bit of moisture does wonders for insect survival. And diversifying the vineyard ecosystem will also benefit. Diversity is the key to everything, I think. But it will also benefit things like erosion control. You know these things probably. Reduced runoff of agrochemicals looks better. Nutrient management, pollinator conservation, of course, which is an increasingly big deal, and soil health. And the benefits of native plants, we've heard a little bit about that. The fact that they're locally adapted and evolved, they're at the ancestral plants, more likely to enhance other ecosystem services. So you might be growing native plants with one thing in mind, but they'll also provide service for other parts of the ecosystem that you need. They have lower maintenance costs, of course. You don't need to irrigate them specifically. You don't need to look after them because they're adapted to the environment in terms of fertilizer and all that sort of stuff. You don't need to do that. And better survival because of it. So it's a no-brainer really, to use an old term. And beneficial insect populations, as I said, have declined as habitats and native flora have been removed for agriculture. So what we're doing is trying to reverse that trend. Example from my area is Red Mountain, which is a good area for growing wines, but it used to be native habitat that I used to roam across 26 years ago, and it was covered in these butterflies. They're not there anymore, of course, because there's vineyards there. They're still around in areas further out, but we're pushing everything further away from urban areas and agriculture. But there is room to bring these things back if we plant the right things with native plants. A less visible example of a beneficial insect important to grape growers is the anagrus wasp that I mentioned earlier that parasitizes leafhoppers. And it depends on nectar and alternate hosts from native plants for survival. So, by removing habitat, you're removing populations of this beneficial insect that grape growers very much need. So the concept of the research we were doing is habitat restoration for vineyards using native plants. And this was 2010, so quite a long time ago now when we started this. Refugia to allow beneficials to exist closer to the grapevines, and flowers to provide in or near crop refueling zone for beneficials and pollinators. Those were the concepts that but what we didn't know was at that time is which native plants are best in terms of attracting and sustaining beneficial insects. There's no information on that. I mean, you could just grow, take a guess, which, in a lot of areas, that is what's happening. And with pollinators, you can make a much better guess because pollinators are very visual. You see them, and so Xerces Society is a great resource website. They've got books as well that provide lists of plants, and Linda's talked about that too. So with pollinators, it's easier, but with predators and parasitoids, which are often small and not very often noticed, it's less of a easy thing to know. So we over a number of years, we stuck sticky traps out on native plants in the Yakima Valley, about 120 different species of native plants, mostly perennials because we were looking for plants that growers could use in their vineyards, and perennials would offer the better opportunity to have sustainability. And this is just a list of plants. Sagebrush is number one, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the point is that we did create this list of native plants that are beneficial to beneficial insects or predators and parasitoids in terms of attracting them, like magnets, and sustaining them. So we do have that now. We have that list of good plants. And number one is big sagebrush, very surprisingly or unsurprisingly, because it is the ancestral plant of sagebrush country. So I guess it's not too surprising. And probably most insects are going there for the refuge rather than the pollen, because the pollen's not there for most of the time. It's October only. So it attracts the greatest number of beneficials in terms of individuals, but it is not the best in terms of the different groups of beneficials we were looking at. We're looking at 10 different groups, predatory mites, predatory bugs, we had 10 groups, and they only attracted 5 of those 10. So it wasn't the best. We had other plants that were better than that. And one of those is rabbitbrush, another sagebrush type plant. And it's much better than sagebrush in terms of attracting beneficials, predators and parasitoids, because the nectar's there. It's a better nectar source, I guess, in August, September, October. And it attracts large numbers of a wide range of beneficial insects. So in the shrub steppe environment, that's a great plant to use. Buckwheats is another one. And this is a group of plants, Eriogonum species. There's a commercial plant called buckwheat. Forget about that, although that works too, actually. But it costs more because it's an ornamental, and it needs a lot of water might work here. But buckwheats, in a hot, dry environment, we have about 10 species in Washington, and they're all good. They're excellent at attracting beneficial insects, a large number of a wide range of beneficial insects. And there's 10 species, and they're spring to summer flowering. We have done trials with incorporating them in vineyard in the rows, and they work fine. They're very hardy. You can mow them. They'll come back because they're perennial. They don't need any water, obviously, and they attract a lot of beneficial insects. So that's a good example of a great group of plants in a shrub-type environment. And there's a couple of examples of the species. There's actually a publication on this that we produced showing how important they were for predators and parasitoids. Now, as you heard from my introduction, I grew up with caterpillars in my bedroom, so I like butterflies, and I carry that with me till this day. And that's part of the beauty with benefits thing, the beauty of butterflies, because buckwheats are also hosts for a number of species of butterflies, little blue butterflies and green butterflies that most people don't see unless you look carefully. And so if you're growing buckwheats, you're also providing hosts for these butterflies, which will breed and survive in your vineyard, potentially. You might have to be careful when you mow and all that sort of thing, but it can be done. So another plant, which is a plant that you can use here, of course, yarrow, because it's pretty widely distributed. That's in our top 10 of plants that attracted the most beneficial insects. Importantly, though, only use the native cultivar, not commercial cultivars. The breeding of commercial red or yellow or whatever has somehow bred out their attractiveness to beneficial insects. And there's publications on this with other native plants showing that, when they're taken and new cultivars, commercial cultivars are created, it tends to be at the cost of them not being as attractive to beneficial insects. Don't know why, but that's true. So only use the native cultivars, and as Linda mentioned, you can get native plants now. It was 26 years ago when I first arrived here, it was impossible to do, but now you can find them. So back to butterflies again, the monarch butterfly, showy milkweed. I paid a lot of attention to milkweed since it was a monarch butterfly host. And it turns out that it's not just for monarch butterflies, it's also for beneficial insects. It attracts large numbers of beneficial insects in 8 of the 10 groups, mostly during flowering, of course, which is only for like a month to 6 weeks. But at that time, it is a very important resource for predators and parasitoids. And not only that, pollinators. It's a great pollinator attracting plant as well. So that's another potential plant that could be used around vineyards. And there are some vineyards, I'm not sure if I got the slide in here, but in southern Oregon that have actually done that. Planted it around the vineyard, actually this form here, narrow-leaved milkweed, there's a number of species. Around the vineyard, hardly any pest problems, and monarch butterflies, which made them very happy. So another plant that's, I'm not sure if it's native or introduced status, probably introduced. Nettles, stinging nettles. Nobody likes nettles except me, I guess. This is a graph showing how important nettles are to attracting these beneficial insects, minute pirate bugs, hoverflies again, and parasitic wasps generally. So just simple nettle plants are a resource for beneficial insects. And then because I'm a lepidopterist, they're also host for butterflies. So another example of beauty of benefits. All the butterflies on this slide here have caterpillars that feed on stinging nettles. So if you have an out-of-the-way area around the vineyard, you've got nettles there, just leave them there because they are providing benefit in terms of natural enemies and possibly butterflies. And butterflies are threatened, as somebody mentioned about insects declining. Butterflies are an example of that. Another plant, native plant, and a group of native plants they're good for attracting beneficial insects. They're also a butterfly host plant for at least 3 or 4 species. And you know that here with the Fender's blue, of course. Willows is another, larger plant, of course, but attracts many beneficial insects, not just during spring either, when it's flowering, but it's probably a refuge type plant. And it's also a host for the butterflies on this page. So you get the idea of where I'm going with this. Goldenrod is another one, and there's a few types of goldenrods. They're invariably good for pollinators, but also beneficial insects too. Another one in the shrub steppe is purple sage. Oregon sunshine, which is another one that grows here, is very good for beneficial flies, like the hoverflies. They're extremely attracted to Oregon sunshine. So that would be a great plant to have in a vineyard here. Blanket flowers, another one, I think that would survive here. It's actually already being grown by farmers in the Columbia Gorge because it is an attractive thing for beneficial insects. So, I'm just skimming across the top of all this, of course, but I came up with the dozen best native plants for beneficial insect diversity in eastern Washington. So some of these don't occur here, but yarrow does, that's on the list. Goldenrod does, I imagine. Milkweeds do. Nettles, of course, wild rose probably, and lupin. So there's a few there that occur here too. So really, somebody needs to do the work that I've skimmed across here in this area, and every area where grapes are grown, if the idea is to integrate native plants so you get the best out of native plants. So we did a brief study looking at habitat restored vineyards in Washington state compared to non-restored habitat vineyards, conventional. And I forgot to put the slides in, but there weren't many pests involved at that time, but there was a significant difference in terms of pests. There's far fewer pests in the habitat restored vineyards compared to the conventional vineyards. But at this particular project, I was more interested in the butterflies. And the butterflies were far more abundant and diverse in the habitat restored vineyards. And there's a paper that went with that too, showing that vineyards can be butterfly habitat, because vineyards are not very often sprayed anyway. And if you're doing what you're all doing, they're certainly not. And so they're an ideal butterfly habitat. And in fact, in places like Europe, where land is of greater premium than here, agriculture needs to become a habitat for beneficial insects, including butterflies and pollinators, because they're just running out of space. So it's a good thing. I mean, we're not running out of space like that, but we can bring these insects back into agriculture, is my point. So the habitat enhanced vineyards had at least 29 species, some of them shown on this slide here, compared to the conventional vineyards where there was 3. So it was a big difference, and it can be done. And I have got the slide, milkweed and monarchs in low input viticulture. It's already being done by some grape growers in southern Oregon. Okay, I'm plugging my book at the end. That was my talk. The Lives of Butterflies, which I've talked about a lot. It's a book that was published last year. And people are just curious about their lives and how they live. And there's chapters there on habitat and things that I've talked about now. And beauty of benefit is actually in there as well. So thank you for listening. And thank you.